deal more strategic discussion, both our countries, with Germany, is a fail-safe mechanism. It's a reserve. But where I think that Germany has got to perhaps be a bit more realistic about it is what happens if the US nuclear guarantee is not there. Are you just going to give up?
Your defence spokesman, John Cartwright, wrote recently there is a distinct possibility of devising a policy based on a minimum deterrent force operated jointly by Britain and France in trust for Europe. What is it for, this minimum European deterrent, if it is not capable of defending Europe? Should the Americans not be there?
Well, I think it is capable of defending Europe. It's an inferior capacity. The very fact that you acknowledge it's a minimum deterrent.
Is it capable of defending Germany? Would it mean that the cities in Britain and France would be obliterated to defend cities in Germany?
Well, there I disagree fundamentally with Lawrence Friedman. He said there was no difference between France and Germany making a decision to threaten the use of the deterrent and the United States. There's a hell of a lot of difference in the situation in which Germany has already lost part of its territory. Increasingly, France has accepted this is the change of strategy, that they are involved. And that's why they're having and ought to have more discussions between France and Germany. And so Britain has learnt that lesson. I mean, if the Second World War has taught us anything, it's no use just sitting back while Poland goes, Czechoslovakia goes. We have got to face it, that if there is an expansion in Europe, we are very, really threatened. And in France, when we talk to people, hitherto France has said they would give no guarantee beyond France. But they said, well, if Britain and France were really cooperating at a deep and fundamental level, it might be different. And certainly logic tells one it would give a little bit more confidence to the Germans if they saw our two countries operating together, and particularly if we'd involved ourselves.
Francois Heisberg, this sort of Franco-British guarantee would represent a major change in one of the most fundamental planks of French security policy. Can you see any prospect of it happening?
No. At least not in the way which has been described by Mr. Cartwright in the article you alluded to. Now, if you're talking about cooperation, collaboration, coordination between the French and the British force, one can imagine specific areas. And this has been done before. There were talks initiated by Mr. Heath and Mr. Pompidou in the early 70s. They got pitifully small results because, unfortunately, the real areas of possible cooperation, when you look at the specifics, are extremely limited.
You're the French technocrat. Do you think that this sort of Franco-British collaboration or cooperation, whatever we call it, could work out cheaper than Britain simply buying Trident?
The Americans have, from what I understand, made extremely generous conditions in terms of R&D recoupment for the sale of Trident II to Britain. Now, France, of course, has a rocket which does exist on the shelf, which is called the M4, which is a good rocket, which would satisfy British strategy in a sense which is probably more adapted to Britain's situation than Trident II is. However, I would hesitate to put a price tag on that one, especially given what was mentioned in Lawrence Friedman's presentation, the adaptation costs for this sort of weapon system, adaptation costs which are always extremely costly.
Well, let me ask David Owen. Did you say the M4 ballistic missile would be less costly?
No, I don't know. I rather agree with Francois. I think it probably wouldn't, knowing the French usually extract a price. On the other hand,
we don't know.
The political significance of a decision to go for the M4 is massive, because you would really be making a step towards European procurement and European political cooperation in all fields. And I believe that the French government might be tempted, but I don't look on it as a saving grace. I look on the French will drive a harder bargain than the United States. I don't think it would be cheaper. The only way it would be cheaper if you went for 3 submarines instead of 4, and that's where the coordinating of submarine refitting cycles is extremely important, because it makes it much more credible to only have a 3 submarine force for Britain's case.
Would you go down this road even if it all added up to more than Trident?
Well, certainly not if it all added up to more than Trident in both cost and in terms of megatonnage. Although, if it was...
In terms of cost?
If it was equivalent cost, I would look at it hard, because I want to go down the European route. I opposed Trident, as you know, when I was Foreign Secretary, because I thought we were getting ourselves once again locked in to the American cycle.
What about Professor Friedman's point about the signals that such a move would send to the United States?
Well, that you've
affect America's commitment to Western Europe's defence?
And Germany. That's got to be handled with care, and I think this is a difficult question. Handled properly and seen the prime aim of any British deterrent is first and foremost still to be a contribution to NATO and targeted by NATO. And you're only talking about joint targeting with the French if the United States have pulled out and you're no longer relying on a NATO targeting.
Professor Friedman, would you like to come in on David Owen's response?
I agree with Dr. Owen that the alternative of 3 subs as against 4 is a realistic one. I think probably the most realistic cost-saving one there is. But the alternatives that might have looked extremely attractive in 1980 just simply are not economically going to look as attractive now. They may have tremendous political significance, but for myself, I'd rather get that political significance in the way that Carsten Voigt was suggesting out of much more consultation, much more openness in our relationship with Germany and other European allies about what our systems can do, the ideas we have about their role and influence within NATO. And I think that if we're trying to build up on European cooperation generally, this is an unwise place to start.
Can I stop you there and go to Richard Pearl, who's waiting in Washington, and ask him how this looks to him on the other side of the Atlantic? All this talk.
Well, yes, I was beginning to think that I ought to try to say something before this hypothetical discussion came to a conclusion. Let me say first that the United States is not going to withdraw its nuclear commitment to Europe. That is a given. It's at the cornerstone of the alliance and alliance strategy. The one circumstance in which one can imagine a serious degradation of the American nuclear commitment is one we talked about earlier. That is, if you should have in power in the United Kingdom a Kinnock government committed to denuclearization on the part of the United Kingdom, because I don't think one can expect the American people to accept the risks entailed in offering nuclear guarantees to a country that is not prepared to accept any risks itself, and indeed would be pushing the United States out of the United Kingdom. So, but in that situation, of course, the question of British alternatives doesn't arise, because Mr. Kinnock is opposed to having any British nuclear forces.
But could I ask you briefly, because I think we may be out of satellite time, if people in Europe make explicit their doubts about the credibility of the American nuclear guarantee, could this affect your commitment to Western Europe's defence? Please be brief.
No, not at all. We maintain this guarantee because it's very much in our own interest. And what matters in the long run is not so much whether Europeans take it seriously, but whether the Soviet Union takes it seriously, and all of the evidence is that they take it very seriously indeed.
Richard Pearl, thank you very much. Our thanks too to David Owen, Carsten Voigt, Francois Heisberg, and our academic filmmakers. A transcript of what you've heard tonight will be available to viewers, and the address to write to will be given after this programme. That was the Channel 4 Inquiry. Good evening.
Here's the address to write to for the transcript of the programme that Peter Sissons mentioned. It's Defending Europe, PO Box 4000, London W36XJ, Glasgow G12 9JQ, or Belfast BT2 7FE. And with the words of Richard Pearl ringing in our ears, I think we can guarantee that the subject of defence will come up again during the Labour Party conference in Blackpool this week. When it does, we'll be there to cover it in Conference Report at 6:30 daily from tomorrow to Friday, and in Neil Kinnock's keynote speech live at 2:30 on Tuesday.